Howdys and salutations, y'all! Hope you're having a good one. Now, I know I've premised the last few streams with, I'm probably going to cut this short, and then I was like 5 minutes short, but that doesn't really count, does it? This one, it's a genuine warning. We'll see how it goes. I don't know one way or the other, but I am just exhausted. And not like lack of sleep exhausted. I actually am doing quite well on sleep and such, but I don't know. It feels a little bit like sick or just genuinely not feeling great. I don't think I'd be sick right now. I can't think of anything that would have caused it. So I'm hoping that I've just been working myself too hard, because I did have to work long today, and then I've had some other stuff I've had to be doing. Busy times, but when isn't it? Yeah, no, doctor's appointment yesterday means working to make up that time today. Exciting. I can't complain. The fact that my job's that flexible and I don't have to use PTO on it is actually not bad. So, let's see. Where did we leave off? Ah, yes. Niall. Well, anyway, to wrap up my previous thought before I pick back up on the new one, because I'm not feeling great, we may wrap a little early, we may not. I have a sneaking suspicion that I should, though. So I'm going to, rather than taking on face or hair, neither of which are going to be one-day things on a normal day, I'm not too worried about hair. Braids are easier than loose flowing locks, and from this angle we won't have to deal with too much of the loose flowing locks, although there'll be some. Braids are also easier to shade. The reason being, they're much more concrete shapes. Like, even with Malenia's hair, when we were illustrating it, I broke it down into concrete shapes, and even then they were pretty abstract, and they didn't necessarily represent the hair quite as well as I would have liked. Braids, the hair literally is just those shapes. It's like pinch tubes. Interwoven pinch tubes, but even that's easier to draw than a bunch of loose hairs or trying to abstract a bunch of loose hairs into some sort of shape that looks like loose hair. So instead of worrying about any of that, braids should be fine. Loose hairs should be interesting. I think the lighting on the hair is actually going to be probably our biggest time sink on this entire stinking illustration. Okay, hopefully composition was longer than that will be. But I've got some tutorials on how to really make them glow, and I want to try to put those to good use. So we'll see what happens. Not today, though. Today, instead of taking on the nasty big stuff, the fun nasty big stuff, but still big stuff. Funny how art works. But instead of all of that nonsense, I think that we will be having a go at Niall, which, at first glance, you may be thinking, how on earth is this better? Loose, crazy, frizzy hairs, face, complex armor, complex reflections, fabric, it looks like it's the whole lot. But there's two things that make it considerably less bad with this particular composition, and part of the reason that it's composed the way it is. I want to not illustrate Niall. I want to imply the presence of Niall. And that, well, I mean, it's easy to overdo it and do it stupid. Not stupid, but just poorly. Difference between lack of understanding and lack of execution skill, as I should know by this point. I certainly suffer from, well, both at different times. But what we've got with Niall, first off right now, is really faint and really small. And also just kind of like in the corner, it looks like we're up on a platform, which is good, but it still looks too small, which either means that Niall has shrunk a fair bit, or he's really far away, and that doesn't work for the ominous composed room look. So we're going to be keeping Niall, I suspect, larger, but very, very faint. Probably just some reflections, maybe a dark shadow to go with the reflections. It's not going to be much. And they won't even be bold reflections. It's one of those shouldn't even be noticed at first glance, but on subsequent views you're like, ah, wait just a second. We're keeping him subtle. That's really the big thing, is like, he's not the focal point of this illustration, and I want to be careful after we spent so much time on a composition that makes Miquella's location and presence very clear. Ow, I just leaned on a scar. That's not helpful. It's funny, when you're tired, you end up hurting yourself more. Just due to absent-mindedness. But yeah, so before I lose that train of thought, yes, Niall background, not focal point. Don't want to distract from Miquella. Faint and probably smaller in size, at least smaller than the Eclipse Hotel. I forgot that we hadn't illustrated the head yet. Oops. We'll get to that. We'll have to actually do a head shape, although a younger head shape, because Miquella is still supposed to look like a kid. But doesn't change the fact that we can do some stuff with Niall. So, we're taking our composition view. It's still going to be faint, but we're going to do some size and positioning tweaks. We messed with this stinking a ton over the course of this process, but we can mess with it a little more. The other thing, unrelated to this, but just as a comment back to the other thread I was about to start, because I think I've basically explained what we're doing. Niall background. We're going to try to use his elements in the armor to point towards Miquella if we can. I'll explain more of that as we go. But we want to keep the focal point on Miquella. Even background Niall can still be distracting because Niall is big and dangerous, so we're going to have to be careful. So on to random meandering thoughts, of which, as you all well know, I have in plentiful abundance. I was thinking about that whole moment an earlier ago where you're tired and you hurt yourself more. I don't know about y'all, but in school, early school, I refused mechanical pencils on principle because, I don't know, I fancied myself some sort of traditionalist or something when I was like 7. I don't have any idea why. I felt very morally superior about it for some reason. But in high school, I stopped being stubborn about something as petty as that and just tried mechanical pencils. Turns out they're handy, specifically when taking notes, because when they break, it's easier to fix, but they do break much more often. I also wrote really heavily in school, so early on, part of my bias against mechanical pencils is I just broke them constantly and tore the page. Even at I had to start with the 0.9 ones just because my writing was so heavy that 0.7s would just shatter. The lead, anyway. Sometimes the pencil tip too, but mostly the lead. There's a lot of tricks to reopening those pencils if they get crushed, by the way. Don't just, well, I mean, you can just, I'd say don't toss them, but recycle them. But, you know, you can make them work again. Anyway, I've slowly been training myself over the years to be less heavy-handed on the pencils, and I can use 0.5 and even 0.3 pretty consistently and easily now. In fact, 0.5 is my preference now, which I never thought would be the case. Because when I gave up being a traditionalist about normal pencils, I started being a stubborn one about 0.7 being the superior lead and refused to use anything else. For some reason, even though 0.9 was the thing that got me there in the first place. Silly high school me was petty about the dumbest stuff. I was such a grammar nut, too. Oh, my word. Genuinely word in this case. But back to the reason I was thinking about those mechanical pencils is I don't know about y'all, but I got in the habit of being too lazy to want to like change my hand grip to, if the lead broke, I didn't want to change my hand grip to get the lead in. So I would just like I would just bop it against my shoulder and then put it back down on the paper. The problem is when you're writing quickly, it's easy to miss your shoulder and hit like the really soft like fleshy tissue by your clavicle instead, and so I bruised myself a lot. Not fully bruised, but it stinking hurt. To solve that problem, I did something stupider. I switched from my shoulder to my forehead. Don't ask me why I thought that was a good idea. I'm still not sure to this day. It wasn't a good idea. It hurt. Considerably. But nevertheless, it was what I did. I was actually, you know what I really fancied myself? Not a scavenger, but, or not a traditionalist, but something of a scavenger in high school. I never wanted to buy mechanical pencils because you go to like Staples or wherever, and there's just a million of them, and half of them are super dirt cheap, and half of them are crazy expensive, and I got overwhelmed and didn't want to bother. And so I would basically use scavenging as the equivalent of a taste test or a free sample. Because people it's not like I'd steal any of them, but people lose them in hallways constantly, or just leave them around, or bail on them, and they run out of lead. And so I'd just pick them up anytime I saw a pen in the hallway on the floor. That wasn't like if it was fancy and expensive, I wouldn't mess with it. But like, I'm talking one of those ones where it's gonna be in like a 10-pack for $3 or something. Anytime I saw those, I'd pick them up and I'd try them out. I never ran out of pencils, which was awesome because I did lose them just as quickly as I found them. But it was great. But it meant that I got to become something of not a pencil expert, but I got somewhat adept at judging the pencil quality, which was very fun, actually. Let's see. We'll start with this for now. But it also meant that I found pens and pencils that I really, really liked. Like, I was very fond of the Atlantis line of Bic pens for a while. Very smooth writing. Smooth writing mixed with very cheap and durable. It was a nice mix. Let's see. Pencils, I ended up concluding that the best ones were the like bulk 40-pack, just super plain ones, Papermate, I think. I tried all sorts of fancy ones, and they're heavier, which made them harder to write with, especially because y'all know I already had a heavy writing hand. Extra weight did not help. The pencil equivalent of a lead foot. But also, like, I don't know. You lose them, you're not out much. And you can buy one pack and basically be set for high school. Which is a pretty good deal in my eyes. Obviously, there's times when you need specialty pencils, but you know when that time isn't? Taking notes. It's just not. The most specialty pencil you're ever going to need taking notes in like a school setting is like maybe some colored pencils if you want to color code something. And even then, I'd recommend like Finaliner markers or fine liner. I don't know what they're called. But like the felt tip ones, depends on how heavy you write. If you write heavy, don't do either of those because you'll just break them. But there's ones that are if you once you learn how to write more lightly and have better pen control, they're really nice. And now I've got like I've overcompensated. I actually write with a really light hand most of the time, and if I start writing too heavy, like my brain just freezes up and like my hand just stops. Very dumb. Man, I'm in a rambly mood tonight. I hadn't thought about pencils like that in a long time. I bought one pack of 0.5 pencils like 3 years ago, and I haven't had to worry since. I've got a set of art, like actual pencils too, but they're still like the dirt cheap $10 for a full pack of like HB6 or H6 to B4 or whatever. Sounds like I'm playing chess on an oversized chessboard. Okay, that's our fabric practice. Really ought to just do like a whole-on fabric folder. Create folder and insert layer. This folder is fabric. Funny how half the time I label a layer and then I'm just straight up wrong about what ends up going on it. Rough fabric brainstorming, huh? Just ended up with not at all rough, pretty good fabric. Hey, thanks for the follow, Trey01235. Happy to have you. As long as you're not a spam bot, but I assume you're not. Sorry about my hesitance. We've had a few nasty ones in recently. But yeah, welcome. Welcome aboard. We were just continuing our Elden Ring Miquella illustration. And yeah, we'll see how this goes. Right now we're actually not illustrating Miquella, we're illustrating Niall in the background. Which is actually a good point to transition to why I was doing that positioning. Hey, perfect. Great to have you. But yeah, so I can start talking a little bit more about what we're actually working on here. And the reason that I'm worrying about Niall's positioning, even when it's just stinking an arm silhouette. Two things, really. Part of it is character size hierarchy, which is really stinking tough with Miquella because Miquella looks like a child. But generally, you want the focal point character to, at least in a case like this where we want them to look imposing and intimidating, we want them to loom over anyone else in the scene. We want to show that they're literally large and in charge, as they say. And that goes back even to like ancient Sumerian and Babylonian like stone carvings and illustrations. It's a good tactic. It makes it very clear who's important and who isn't in your drawings. But we also realized that Miquella is tiny and Niall is stinking 12 feet tall and wields a stinking halberd. So it's not going to be the easiest thing to make Niall look smaller than Miquella unless we put him really far away or we put Miquella on a raised platform. Now, we don't have a lot of background to work with, so either of those are going to be somewhat tricky, but we can imply it with a size difference. However, there's one more important thing we can do, because if size hierarchy was the only tool in our arsenal, art would be pretty stiff, gonna be honest. Very stiff. You'd have very strong rules about who could be bigger or smaller than what, and it would be kind of boring. So instead, I'm actually going to have Niall be bigger, but I'm going to make it so that he's essentially deferring to Miquella in two ways. One of them, and the more obvious one, especially in the final thing, is fading into the background. Niall's going to be mostly in the shadows. We may have a few reflections, but not much. Number two is a little fuzzier, and I'm not even going to pretend I'm a master of it or that I'm going to be doing it well here. This is a learning stream, after all. Learn together, see what the process is, exchange tips, all that jazz. As they say, the best way to learn is to teach, although don't do that until you at least know something or you're guiding everyone in the wrong direction. But I do know at least something about this, and this is focusing on the composition and the lines of action. Specifically, all of our action here is happening with Miquella, and the main focus is between Miquella, the Eclipse Hotel above, and our figure here below, the hand. Ubi, if you will. Although if Ubi ended up in this situation, it would be a very dark turn for that show. There's a reference thinking no one's going to get. However, what we're going to do with Niall is essentially have every stray line try to point back into this action. And specifically, since this is supposed to be a character illustration, even with action around it, I'm going to try to get as much as possible bringing the viewer's eye back to Miquella's face. Now, I can't just go like... let me actually make a layer for this. I can't just go and be like, make his armor an arrow that just points. That would be a little boring. Whoops. And not very effective. Let me fix my tablet area real quick. There we go. And that's, I mean, even since ancient Greece, they figured out better ways to do it than that. Although sometimes they were a little on the nose. Let's see. Instead, we're just going to make sure that any of the prominent lines from Niall, it doesn't have to be all of them, but the main character lines are sort of directing the eye in this direction. Now, if we had all of Niall on screen, I would be trying to figure out his pose in a way that where he's looking to Miquella, which would make sense in the scene, or at least looking in that general direction. Making sure that perhaps his halberd, the like angle of him holding it even casually, was a line that would be sort of behind him and pointing towards Miquella as well, because I mean, you can imagine halberd just sort of on the ground behind him, or like strapped to his back. I mean, he's even sort of got it like that at a more extreme angle, so it'd be easy to make it tilt or align it in such a way that it worked. Arm pose, same deal. So that's what we would be doing if we had all of him. But we don't actually have all of Niall in this illustration. We have his shoulder, and that's basically it. So that's what we're working with. I mean, we could still get the halberd, like the butt of the halberd, if we really wanted to. I think it'd be distracting, honestly, just because it's a pretty harsh, like, sharp line. Much as I love halberds, and I do, anyone who's ever watched me play any Souls game can attest I like them too much. I will use them when they're absolutely suboptimal in any way, shape, or form. I've got a halberd problem. They're just so cool, even though they're not really medieval. They're like super late medieval, early Renaissance, but they're cool and very practical. Anyway, plus they mean that I can stay a little further away from the enemies, which in my mind is 100% cool. I am a defensive player if ever there was one. Dark Souls 1 was my jam, Dark Souls 3 less so. Elden Ring's been a good mix. But despite my love of halberds, I think we're going to have to cut it from the scene. Alas. Niall's halberd's cool too, it's got like a banner and everything. And, well, I don't know. I mean, it's cool in the literal sense that it has ice, but I gotta deduct points for the fact that he killed me with it like 5 times. Not as big of a fan of that particular halberd once you've seen the blade end of it. However, in lieu of the halberd, what we basically have are these armor decorations. And I'm actually going to flip this. It looks really funny flipped. I don't know why. It's a 3D model. It's not like they've drawn it imbalancedly. But the whole composition of it's just really weird now, which is funny. It says a lot about actual composition. But what we're focused on here, rather than trying to analyze why the composition of this looks weird, or if it's going to right size in my eyes in a second, just from looking at it, or if it's because the text is backwards, we're going to focus on the arm. Maybe the cloak if the angle is worthwhile, or we can just not include the cloak with the implication that it's draped like further behind somewhere. But what I really want to focus on are two pieces of this arm armor. We've got this lovely pauldron up here, which probably won't even be entirely visible. I mean, just thinking about what part of the arm is here, we might have this little fin. We might be able to see a tiny fin of it down there. But mostly we're going to be seeing this arm piece here. We're going to be seeing a smaller section, and then we'll have the big arm, which obviously you can see this loose sketch was not done with any sort of proportions. Which is always just a heckin' joy. We'll have to move some stuff around, but that's okay. Because this funky outcropping is the other piece that I really want to focus on. Because it gives us a lot more control over sort of where this armor is, for lack of a better word, pointing. Let's see. Let's keep on. I'm disregarding the undersketch for now. We'll try to get an actual proportioned arm in here first, and then adjust it to match as needed. The good news is we can make Niall ridiculously large proportional to Miquella, and it's still believable, because Niall is probably 3 times his height. Or their height. Let's see. Big hand. Hands are always bigger than you think they are, unless you're a cartoon character, in which case, maybe chill on the hands a little bit. Okay. But yeah, the two big pieces we got here. We've got this nice decorative edge piece, which we can use to point pretty easily. Like, we can exaggerate the points to basically point at whatever the heck we want. We can use them to guide the viewer's eye into the scene, or down, or up, or whatever we want. Because we can angle this point up a little bit and have it be believable, or out a little bit. So they're actually really handy. And because those edge spikes are potentially more prominent even than the centerpiece, if this center bit doesn't line up where we want, it's okay. We can make it just blend into the materials. Easy enough. It's also dark, so it'd believably blend into the darker background. But these spikes are one, and the other one that we've got a lot of control over, which is really nice, are these wild, stinking flails. I don't know if they're supposed to be feathers, if they're supposed to be representative of the wings that some of the other Clean Rot Knights have sprouted, given that he hangs with that crowd. I don't know, although not actually in this castle. There's not Clean Rot Knights in... Interesting. I guess those were technically Malenia's, and this castle is Miquella's. I wonder if Malenia even knew what was happening here. Lore questions. So many lore questions. Is Miquella genuinely innocent? Is Miquella making bad decisions going through grief? Is Miquella a super, like, uber plan manipulator master? They're all possible. And there's decent evidence for any of them. Truthfully, there's probably the least amount of evidence for the first one, but even so, people like Miquella, which shows that even if his power is fictional, maybe he still has it. Clever little manipulator. Anyway, I'm telling you, if the DLC reveals that Moog is the victim in all of this, that's going to be a heck of a twist. It'd be right ridiculous. I'm not counting on it, but it's also, I'm not counting it out as an option either. It'd be very funny. And very Dark Souls. And very Berserk, which would make it very Dark Souls. So, regardless of Miquella's intent, what power we do have here is an interesting one, because these, whatever they may be, if it's... Is that his hair? His hair can't go to beyond the length of his cape. Can it? I mean, they did say that he couldn't die if he wanted to. Maybe he's just been chilling up there growing his hair out while everyone else dies repeatedly or gets haircuts. I don't know. I think it's a fur coat because they're in an ice region. But whatever it is, it's pretty wispy fur. I'm trying to think of what critters that would be from. Like the gate lion types? With the swords strapped to their arms? Don't know. In any case, the joy of something wispy like this, especially in a room where there's not a clear, like, breeze or anything, is we can basically just make it point wherever the heck we want. So if we wanted to all point at Miquella's face, it doesn't even look unbelievable that it would do that. It just looks plausible. If we wanted to all point to the sky, if we had the eclipse up there, we could just exaggerate it a little bit, really make it look like there's some dramatic breeze blowing behind, even if there isn't. So we have a lot of control over those two pieces, so they're what we're going to be playing with here. That said, you can already see that we've got a lot of detail happening up here now. And even if Miquella is still the most prominent, we no longer have the nice, clear, like, light back or empty background and then detailed point, face, arm. Nice line of action that we had right through there. Even the fabric follows that line pretty well, which is good. Somewhat fortunate, because that wasn't entirely intentional, but good. But now we've got this sort of blob over here, and that's, like it or not, going to be distracting. I mean, that's why we bailed on some of the early compositions, is because there was too much border noise and background noise. Especially the one with the big window frame and the eclipse going on in the background, and probably part of Castle Sol visible, and still Niall, and like borders that aligned with the actual like image, so it looked like it was inside of a tarot card rather than an actual pose. There was too much happening. Could be a cool piece, but not when we're trying to make this a character drawing first and foremost. In fact, honestly, if I was smart, I wouldn't have drawn Miquella doing anything. Or just Miquella in like a normal pose. But, you know, we try to be ambitious and actually learn things for each illustration. And so that's what we're doing. Or at least each illustration on stream. There's something to be said for, like, doing your practice exercises and then taking the skills you get from those and making an illustration within your skill set. That's probably how you're actually, you know, profitable if you want to do drawings of a certain quality. Like, yeah, that would be how you do it. You do illustrations within your skill set so you can do it in a timely manner and get paid, and then you practice to expand your skill set so that there's more options to you for your main illustrations. It's also not a bad idea in terms of splitting practice versus fun. But we're not doing any of that. Stream is for teach learning, and so we shall be learn teaching. And what we're learn teaching today is that even if we take out the composition, Niall, this is pretty busy. It's probably too much. So what I'm going to use it for is to line things up, and then we're going to trim out a heck of a lot of the detail that's actually happening here. And we will go from there. And oh boy, that woozy not feeling great is coming over me, so we better work somewhat quickly because I think we're going to have to cut this stream semi-short. Do I just need to drink water? I drank a lot of water, though. Is it because the weather's been stinking crazy? I don't stinking know. It's possibly because I had to work long today and I had a doctor's appointment yesterday, so I'm just tired. Funny how that be. I'm sure there's ways to be like energetic all the time. And I feel like one of those ways involves either not having a day job or not having hobbies. Because if you try to do both of those things and then all the other maintenance of just like not dying, like eating and prepping food to eat and shopping for food to prep to eat, and also taxes, like at some point there's just not enough hours in the day. So I'm okay if life is a little bit tired all the time. Just not if it's so tired you stop feeling. There's sort of boundaries. I didn't do so hot with those boundaries in college. I worked myself way too hard. A very bad time of it. I did it. I achieved great grades and managed to do all the social stuff I wanted, which admittedly wasn't a ton. I mean, it was a ton. It just wasn't the typical college stuff. I had fun. I learned new skills, and I didn't get stinking any sleep, and I felt miserable for a year. Well, honestly, I felt miserable for like 3.5 of the years for various reasons, but I think I felt like full-on no emotions for a year, which is probably a bad sign. Glad that I'm not doing that anymore. If you're in college and you're reaching that point of stress where you just like, your only emotions are sleepy and stress for deadline, and then without the stress, you're just back to exhausted. And even if it's not sleepy or exhausted, but it's just vaguely empty, and then stress for deadline, and then vaguely empty, it's probably a sleep problem. I mean, or actual depression. In either case, it's worth talking to people about it, not keeping it to yourself. And in either case, it's probably beneficial to try to get to sleep earlier. Not going to pretend like that's going to solve all your problems. Sleep is not a magic cure-all, but I was surprised at how many times being tired didn't feel like being tired. It just felt like being empty. Don't let yourself get to that point. Take care of yourselves. If you're feeling that way, I hate to break it to you, but one night of sleep ain't gonna fix it. Once you're at that point, you need to like full reset before you're gonna start like getting better. And that's either gonna require some brute force, which is an awful lot of willpower that you're probably not feeling right now, an opportunity like spring break, which unfortunately just passed for more people, or holidays, or looping in someone else to help, like sleep tracker, accountability buddy, someone else to help. Doesn't even have to be someone you know that well. If it's college, the odds are there's people willing to help because everyone is tired and burnt out and exhausted. I know very few people who had a pure happy college experience, or even like a mostly happy college experience. But no time to dwell on that now. I'm so happy to be through that. There were good things. I made lots of good friends. I liked all my professors. My classes were fascinating. Like, I don't regret going to college, but I would definitely do it differently with the stuff I've learned. It didn't help that I went to college between 2016 and then I graduated in December of 2020, which is probably from the start of really nasty, aggressive politics being a thing in day-to-day conversation, and really, like, let me tell you, that throws a wrench when you're trying to meet new people and, like, get to know people in college and learn about the world. When everyone is angry about everything, it makes that much more stressful. And then I got to graduate into a pandemic, which was, not awesome. Not at all awesome. Honestly, it worked out for me, but, like, it's one of those things where it seems like it was a lot of bad stuff, but some of it, like, graduating in the pandemic was actually great for me. It was horrible for most everyone, so it's definitely a silver lining, and I'm not pretending like, oh, yeah, no, it was good. Why is everyone complaining? Obviously, it was horrible. But as an introvert who, for the first time in my as an introvert and, like, work myself too hard, for the first time in my life, I had no deadlines and all the time in the world mostly alone. I stinking thrived. But I mean, that's only because other people were willing to put themselves in risk to keep supply chains and stuff going, or not willing but had to. So I'm not going to pretend that my thriving is just like, oh, you just need the right mindset to do this. Like, I was lucky, and I don't deny that for a second. And there's debts that I'm never going to be able to repay for people just keeping things running day to day. People I don't even know. Logistics are crazy. So take some of that good folks did to keep you going and pass that along if you were in a similar situation. But that doesn't mean that you can't still thrive in that situation despite it. You just need to appreciate what's happening to make it possible and then still try to make the most of it. Because if you feel horrible and guilty and then still don't do anything tangible to either improve yourself or to pay back try to either pay it back or pay it on for what people have done to help you, then you're just wasting stinking everyone's time, including your own. So stinking do something with it. Don't just sit in misery. That's the worst choice. Self-improvement at the expense of others, bad. Lack of self-improvement at the expense of others, worse. Self-improvement and improving the world for others at the expense of others, not ideal, but it's probably the best shot any of us can work towards right now. Just aim for net positive. That's my goal anyway. One way or the other. We all got different skills and different ways to add to it. But just try to aim for net positive. And I'm not saying you need to literally tabulate it out like in Stinking the Good Place or whatever. I haven't seen much of that, but I feel like I've seen enough clips, I feel like they hit on a similar philosophical question. But I do know that they're not wrong about, like, we've all got debts that we're never going to see who we're indebted to, and we're probably never going to be able to pay them back. But we can pay it on. And as long as you're putting good stuff out there, and not just to, like, local friends and buddies, but actually trying to make net community or net world a better place, that's the stinking point of living, isn't it? Like, even if you assume that there's, like, no spiritual anything, no future, no afterlife. Like, the point of being on the earth isn't just to max pleasure and then die. That'd be stinking, I don't know, just lame? Like, A, pleasure has diminishing returns, so you're going to be chasing an endless goal anyway. That's stinking fruitless. You may as well put your back into a little bit and leave it better for the next person, so they'll have a better shot at making it better for next and so on, and then maybe we won't, all perish when the planet dies. I just mean from, like, the sun exploding or something in a couple billion years. I'm not talking about the immediate crises, although I suppose it's relevant for that. But just, like, try to pass it on a little better than you got it. It's not crazy hard. I feel like that's not even that selfless of a thing, because you still benefit yourself by doing it most of the time. Like, I'm not acting like I'm stinking like the next prophet, or I'm a super humble, or like I feel like this is just basic. Like, what's the point of living at the expense of others when you're just gonna die anyway? Man, when I'm tired and or sick, I get rambling on stuff, don't I? I don't disagree with any of that, but man, I've been rambling. Let's look at composition. um, because, whoo boy, I got on something of a tangent there. I have no idea if anyone's even watching or if it's just bots, but if you are, thanks for putting up with that. Hope you found it interesting, and or, I don't know, if you found it enraging, I hope it was at least an interesting kind of enraging and not the I'm just mad at the world kind. Who knows? That gets into a whole different not that philosophical, very pragmatic conversation about the difference between entertainment and engagement that we probably don't want to jump into tonight. But if I get distracted again, I probably will. So, Nile arm, trying to think up the alignment before I reveal my own stinking D&D alignment from all these conversations. Let's see. First off, the way I've drawn it feels a little squatty. It should definitely be larger compared to Miquella's head. Well, in the background, it's probably fine. We may adjust it, the proportions feel off. I'm just trying to get placement right now. Which admittedly proportions are kind of important for, but no matter. If we assume Niall's mostly in the background, then we can actually put him some distance away, maybe even a tiny bit above Miquella. I don't want exactly level, because that weirdly, that causes it's not a tangent problem entirely, but it's a rhythm problem. Rhythm being patterns in the layout of an art piece. People define rhythm so confusingly. It's not patterns in the art, because then your first thought is like, oh, well, I'll just put in plaid. No, it's not that kind. It's not some sort of musical allegory. The first time I encountered it, people tried to explain it that way. That was not helpful. Way too esoteric. Maybe it makes sense if you've been doing it a while. Horrible for beginners, unless they're already musicians, and even then, maybe horrible. It's just, is there a pattern to the way you're placing stuff in the piece? Like, it gets into things like, do you have a repeating pattern? We don't really have a lot of good rhythm in this piece, honestly, and it's part of the problem. But we're trying to at least get parallels between the hand. I want the mirror of the Shotel shadow on the hand, which will help tie those 2 points together. We've got decent pose and curvature, which will do. But the biggest thing I'm worried about in this is actually less creating a good rhythm, because I've conceded that the composition on this piece is what it is, and we're not fighting it anymore. What I want to do, what I'm mainly focusing on, is avoiding creating bad rhythms. Because if we create something where there's a pattern that we don't mean to, people will notice it and it's distracting. It's like, have you ever seen a house and just like the shingles on it? It's non-noticeable. It's just shingles. Have you ever seen a house where they accidentally had one row of, usually there's a couple different colors of shingles, not always, but on a lot of houses, at least around here there are. And I'm not talking about green, blue, orange. I mean light blue, dark blue, medium blue. But they're scattered randomly, and so it looks, it just looks like a roof. It's not distracting. It's not really the focal point. It's just texture. Unless they've got those nice curved shingles where it is a focal point, but that's got different rhythms because you've got the lines and the curves, and it doesn't matter. What I mean is normal shingles, when they're just random, it's not a focal point. When they accidentally place them so that it forms like a straight line of the same color, it jumps out at you. It's not something done on purpose. Like, I'm not talking about where they actually do it on purpose, but I mean where, like, they just accidentally put the light blue accent tile, like, in the same column, 6 rows in a row, and, like, that catches your eye from the heckin' street. That's a bad rhythm. And likewise, I don't want this to be the same height as Miquella, because people, like it or not, believe it or not, and probably not consciously, it's going to draw their attention more to this. Because it's like, oh, this is the prominent thing. Why is it aligned with the subtle thing? Don't want that. Really bad. It's also, it's honestly the underlying reason they talk about like avoiding bad tangents is because it confuses depth, but it's also because it creates a rhythm or a pattern that you didn't want. It's not going to be easy to just throw one of those together as an example that would illustrate this. But like, it's not happening here. But let's say that hypothetically all of the folds of this like toga outfit, dress, whatever it is, just happened to line up with creases on the hand or even just creases on the sleeve. Like, it's clearly a different texture. They'd be different colors. But even so, if, like, every single one of these, just, like, if that happened to line up there, if this one happened to line up there, this one happened to line up with this crease, and so on, then suddenly it gets a little more vague which is in front, and it gets a lot more, why did the artist do that? Why? Is there some connection? It makes it harder to read at a glance for people who aren't looking into deeper meanings and just want to see it because you're like, what's on front? Why is this connect? Oh, they're two different things. Even with color differences, trust me. But if anyone's actually trying to understand the piece a little more, then it's going to be really confusing because they're going to be asking, why the heck did the artist do that? Because it looks like you did it intentionally because it lines up. So you don't want accidental bad rhythms like that. Or bad tangents like that, for that matter. And I have to be real careful about that. It was part of the challenge with the posing, is I didn't want the show-tell lining up the wrong way with the head. Because, I mean, on the one hand, if the curve matched it, it would be an interesting framing device. But if the curve, like, just barely overlapped it a little bit, it would instead look weird. Like a barely overlap and then back down. It would just look like he had a weird hair thing until people, like, their eyes got further down and they saw, oh, it's the thing he's holding. Be like, what's his hair ornament? What's going on with that? So yeah, avoiding bad rhythms is really my priority right now. Okay, and I can tell that I'm tired and rambly and not feeling super great, so we're going to keep this short. What I'm going to do instead here is part 2 of this. Well, okay, part 1 is I said I wasn't going to line it up, and then when I lined it up as an example, I just stinking left it there. Let's not do that. Let's instead... Let's look at noticeably taller first, and then we'll look at noticeably shorter. Noticeably taller. Feels like we should expect a cape or something more visible down here, which would be more distraction. It's also accidentally lining up, well, with this one, but not the actual show-tell, so it's less of a big deal. Although show-tell does kind of point at him, but it's subtle, so I'm actually okay with that. Fine with drawing a line between those two. Helps point him out in the background when he's faint. And ties him to Castle Saul and what's happening here. And the fact that he's immortal after this ritual happened, even though they failed to revive a certain someone. So clearly something went wrong involving him at this moment. So I'm fine with the Eclipse Shotel pointing at him, actually. However, I don't love the open space below, and I don't love the weird counter that it's giving to Miquella. Like, it's not necessarily bad. If we keep it really faint, it'll be fine. But it just feels a little bit too tall. That's the other thing, is it does actually make him look extremely tall, like he's actually on a platform looking down at us. Which, like, it's just too tall even for Niall. Oops. We can move it to more mid-range. Which is also okay. Let's see. I don't hate that, actually. That's not bad. Let's look at it sitting in this angle. Still taller. Still probably a little too tall, but it's better. Let's put this. Yeah, okay, that one angled with that gap in the hair. Easy to recreate if we need to. We can try shorter. It makes us look like we're up on a platform and makes this section look kind of too busy, probably, although it'll be fainter. The final thing. We can even like make it subtle to help with that. Not bad, and it points us into the arm, which is actually a good place for focal focus. But it does make us look like we're very high up compared to Niall, which we may or may not want. Pardon. I apologize. What we might do instead is make it slightly larger, but keep it at this point where it's still like sort of aiming like this. That actually it kind of muddles the angle a little bit. Makes it look like he's just standing right next to Miquella, which I don't necessarily want. And it's probably part of the problem with copying right off of this reference for our pose. We have to adjust the posing a little bit. We go back to our higher angle with the new larger arm. Not bad, although once again, it does still feel like there should be cloak or something. Really, it points us well to the face, but less well to the actual action. Now we can adjust this tip to point more towards it. We can adjust the hair too. I guess the other one could just balance it and that'd be mostly okay. But let's try thinking this through just a tiny bit more. Y'all have seen what happens to me when we get into composition problems. We should have known. We should have known. Never let him touch layout. Doesn't help that I've been doing unrelated layout stuff for work like half of the day. I'm helping build an internal website, which is actually good fun. I quite enjoy it. However, it means my brain is on hyper, like, tweak layout mode, adjust for aesthetics, and I'm a little not braining it successfully anymore. Okay, I'm going to scoot this more off screen and then keep with the up. I just need to figure out what. Oh, yes, go ahead and do that. So I'm looking at the other arm. Pauldron's match. Because I did some pencil sketches trying to figure out the alignment on this earlier, and I'm going back and referencing them since we've been fiddling with it long enough, and I don't want to make this a composition stream, darn it. Especially when you see what my final plan for this is, you're going to say that it super wasn't worth it. But it's why I'm focused more on composition than quality of the drawing, I'll say that much. Okay, assuming that those are the feathers. Nab my notes. Or rather, lack thereof. Oh, okay, that's those two lines. So that put the pauldron considerably lower, actually. Pauldron. Top of pauldron more at face, bottom of pauldron, well, more like bottom of this below arm. Also means that it's actually noticeably larger, kind of looming. I'm okay with that. And then hair actually, or this fluff, considerably further up, which I'm also kind of okay with. Because we're just getting a loose impression of Niall. We're not actually that worried about proportion Niall-ity. We can make that bigger. Have this point towards face. Have this angled better to point also towards face. And then we'll highlight this down one too, because what I really want to do alignment. And then we're going to get ourselves another layer in here. Nile reflection. Because what I really, really want for Nile is actually very little. I want just a handful of highlights. Now we know where our light source is coming from on this one. We know that the light is coming from behind Miquella, which will put Nile almost entirely in shadow, but it means any reflected light will also be sort of coming from this right direction, possibly some in front, reflected off of Miquella's hair, actually, and possibly a little behind, but most likely not much. So keeping that in mind, what we really want to actually see as highlights in the finale is probably going to move that down a little bit as our hypothetical. We'll get just one there, and we'll have one sort of along here that points well in that direction. We may get like a little off of this one too. Just a little bit off the gauntlet, keeping it pointing up, of course. Not too worried about the accuracy of reflections so much as the way they orient the eye in the art piece. And then we'll get just like a super faint one off the hair. It's like a couple of these. All of them oriented roughly towards Miquella. And that's probably going to be most of our Nile. We may need to... Now, I'm probably also going to, just for context, I'm probably going to get a silhouette going in here. Like just a very, very faint silhouette, so that it's still recognizably Nile. We obviously already got this edge going in here. We'll keep that. And silhouette that up easily enough. You can feign a little bit with the positioning on that because it mostly works. And then we can also get like a little bit more detail going on with the hair. But I mean, we're not going to have a lot of Nile. We're going to have just enough to be potentially recognizable as Nile. And we're going to keep it fairly faint too. Just a few highlights in the darkness. We'll see if it ends up being recognizable as him. I'm honestly not sure. We may tweak it a little bit once we get to the lighting stage. But, I mean, I think this is roughly what we want. New layer folder. Okay, Nile. Did I manage to put either of them into it? I did not. Apparently it's two L's. Sorry, dude. Getting that wrong this whole time. I mean, that's basically it for Nile. And probably it for me tonight, honestly. I gotta crash and rest a bit. But yeah, Thursday, same bat time, same bat channel, as they say. Maybe we can talk about cosplay ideas, because I've got a few, and those were worth discussing. But also, we will get in here, and if I'm being honest, we're probably going to do the hair. Because I'm going to need... Oh, jeepers, this weekend's kind of busy too, actually. Well, I'm going to try to make time to practice faces. Either tomorrow, which is sketchy, or over the weekend, which is sketchy, but we'll try. Because we need to get Miquella's face in here, and I remind you, our only reference is a one fairly baby-faced statue. Now, we've got a better reference than that, at least. This. This is all we've got. Unless you count the edge of a silhouette in Moog's arm, which is not much. Uh, so going off of that, and just thinking through what we need next, as we go through the face, I'm going to try to remember that we also need the crown. I think it's likely he would have had it, or they would have had it at this point. We can sort of interweave it, and we'll have to figure out the braids and such. Ah, see, accidental rhythm. This looks like a continuous line. I'll have to be careful. Think about it a little more, just to make sure that doesn't happen. We don't want that. We'll also want to make sure we get the band on the right arm. Not visible in this statue, visible potentially in the other two appearances. Although, again, the one on the horse might still not be Miquella, and the one in the Moog illustration might be part of a sleeve or a strap. I don't know. It's impressively unclear. Part of the fun of this one. So we'll tackle those problems next time. Most likely hair, possibly face. I suspect that getting the sketch lined out is going to take us most of the rest of the month, and we're going to be pushing well into April before this one's done. Honestly, I'm okay with that. As much as the last illustration was a challenge of just using my skills, and thinking and coming up with some new concepts or running into them, this one has been intentionally pushing my weak points. Where the last one I was like, okay, I haven't done a proper illustration in actually 2 years, like a full-on try to do lighting and shading and everything. Let's do it, and actually test all these skills. This one is intentionally, composition is a thing I know I'm weak at, human posing is something that I'm still weak at, and faces. So we knew this one was going to be tough, and we're going to be doing some complicated lighting. Although, honestly, complicated lighting I think is actually going to be easier for me than just figuring out the stinking face or the pose. But we'll see, we aren't there yet. So until we get there next time, I wish you all an excellent evening, morning, midday, midnight, whenever it may happen to be, and I hope y'all have a good one.